There was one very special remark Schmidt made in one of his talks, and that's when he said, I'm going to tell you something about your life from a ritualistic point of view, rebirth experience and rites of passage, initiations. And that was really triggering me to investigate this. And the question, of course, is wouldn't you like to be able to do that for your clients? Because this is often a question that is in the back of the mind of our clients. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to be able to address this, right? Or wouldn't you be interested in investigating these issues in your own chart? So yeah, so if you want to, and I strongly would advise you to do so because it's such an interesting thing to investigate. So if you want to investigate all this, subscribe to my new tier on Patreon, which I will be introducing this week. And it's called Life's Initiations and Trials by Fire. So I will explain a lot about this in this video. And when people subscribe, they get this video, but it's much more elaborated because I will be going in depth in all the things that I'm simply touching on in this video. So yeah, let's have a look. All know I did a poll for my patrons to look to and see what they would like most to investigate in the next year. So that's the one I'm going to do now. So yeah, life's initiations and trials by fire, the 7 Hermetic lots and their deeper issues, which is only just one facet of what will be investigated in this tier on my Patreon. Well, in this tier you will learn a new way of investigating charts, and because all of us are familiar with astrological delineations that are focused solely on the natal chart, but there are also issues that can be sort of read between the lines, so to speak, that go beyond the normal procedures of judging astrological factors. And Greek Hellenistic astrology was of course conceptualized in a culture that was quite familiar with and also steeped in the mystery traditions and practices. So the mystery cults, magic, alchemy, healing, oracles, etc. All these were sort of the bread and butter of a lot of people in these cultures, and also in the, of course, in the Greek period in history. So many astrological procedures, and especially the calculation of lots, have pretty strong overtones of ritualistic practices. The Hermetic lots set out in a lost book attributed to Hermes Trismegistus with the intriguing title The Paragon, and or also the Panaretos, which is a translation, can be translated as the all virtuous, of course strongly hints at sort of a secret doctrine in the background of Greek Hellenistic astrology, and we'll be investigating that in this tier. We will investigate this material and how you can use it in a chart delineation. So let me introduce some issues that I will be addressing because they are very important to this material. So what are the principal issues that need to be addressed to delve into all this interesting material? So let me show you the separate issues that I'll be addressing, and of course the delineation of the natal chart. The astrology is of course prime in this. So, but okay, we need to understand the underlying concept, and perhaps that's even the crucial paradigm, which I always call the 3-layered horoscopy, or the 3-layered principles of delineating charts, and I will be showing you what I understand, or how that can be understood in this context. The second issue we need to address is the etymology of the word kleros, which is the Greek term for lots. That's very interesting as well. Then we're going to talk about the differentiation of solar light. I'm almost tempted to also to explain something about that already, but let me just get on with this, and then we'll see that in some slides further on. Because there's also the differentiation of fortune and daimon, which results, of course, in the Hermetic lots. And Then I will address the hermeneutic principles and the circles of principles of the planets and the lots, which is a very interesting way to understand what they are about in a sense. And then, of course, we get to the secret doctrine, the ritualistic dimensions, and the background in Greek Hellenistic astrology, which are principles smacking of magic and alchemy and perhaps even other things. So, yeah. So this is my logo for this investigation. You've probably seen this before, and I used it in many of my presentations, but now we will be focusing very strongly on this path downward. So let's have a look. So let me first address this issue, the underlying concept, and perhaps even the most crucial paradigm, which is the three-layered horoscopy. What's that all about? Again, many of you have probably seen this slide before. So let me explain again what I'm addressing with this. In astrology, planets are understood as being the significators of either beneficial or malefic influences, and often in that sense they seem to be descriptive of what we would call initiations, the nice ones as indicated by the benefics, and the difficult forms of initiation signified by the malefics. These latter are experienced sometimes as trials by fire. But that's not what this tier is about, because as you perhaps know, I'm always trying to get to grips with the idea that there is a three-layered horoscopy, as you can see here in these images, and it can be quite well aligned with philosophical principles and the fate concepts, which play such a crucial role in all astrology, and especially Hellenistic astrology. So the first principle is the astrology being a worldview, the principles informing our horoscopy, three primary ones, which are the images, the planets, and the topical places. And Schmidt introduced many approaches to get a grip on how this can be systematically studied. The etymology of Greek language and the grammatical paradigm turned out to be the most promising in that regard. At the second level, you have horoscopy proper, which is interpreting the natal chart and how it all lands in your chart. All the factors that come from the first level, how they all land in your natal chart and how they signify all sorts of things in your chart and how you can address these things. Now, Schmidt found and introduced many approaches and paradigms as tools to get an overall idea of how to delineate charts. The legal paradigm, the nautical metaphor, you've probably heard of them all before, and they are such helpful methods to understand how you can progress and how you can take on the delineation of a natal chart, and that's pretty awesome and pretty helpful in trying to understand what's going on in a natal chart. And at the third level, that's the level representing the world in which we are, so to speak, thrown. We are born into a world, and before we come to any sort of a spiritual realization or psychological realization as being an individual, then we understand that we are simply thrown into the world, so to speak. So, and the interesting thing is that fortune, the fortune places, and the lots are actually representing this field of knowledge, and that's very interesting. And perhaps Schmidt was even the first one to make us astrologers aware of this realm in our astrology. And well, it's, as said before, I'm personally still trying to get a handle on this level 3 material, and this promising yet confusing new layer in astrological thinking and practice is very interesting and has a lot to do with the topic of this new tier. So the fortune places, and the lots, especially the Hermetic lots, can be used pretty well to try to get to grips and understand what this third level is doing in our lives and how we can, well, include it in perhaps our delineation of natal charts and the life of the native. So now there are a few hints from Schmidt on this worldly level of astrology and delineation, and that's what you will learn in when you subscribe to this tier. So yeah, you could say that from the archetypical level, all that material is sort of downloaded into your natal chart, but you can also say that your experiences in the world at large, the world in which we are thrown, all of us, is sort of the uploading of experiences, and we all, of course, integrate them into our personal life. So this is the model that I'm using to trying to get to grips with these different levels of understanding a natal chart. So yeah, you could say you can talk about the upper perspective, and then you're talking about astrology as a philosophy or a worldview or the principles behind it, or the principles expressed by it. And then at the second level, you are talking about the inner perspective, the principles as working in your personal life and also very much on your soul. And then we have the outer perspective, which is the fortune places and the lots, which are the sort of the facts in the world. Things happen there without intentions, and that's simply the place of where Tuche is very strongly operating. So yeah, that's the level where we'll be investigating much deeper than I've ever done before, and hopefully we can get some purchase on that material. Now, having laid the foundation with this three-layered model that I've presented in the previous slide, we now need to have a look at the etymology of the word kleros, which is the Greek term for what we call a lot, or in modern parlance, an Arabic part or a part. In his postscript to his fantastic tutorial on the Hermetic lots, this is what Schmidt said: the Greek word for a lot is kleros. In an astrological context, this word refers to something cast out from someplace in the chart, and that's normally from the ascendant. And that reminds us of the art of kleromancy, which is divination by means of casting lots. As you can see in this image, when something needed to be done, for instance, when soldiers had to go on a sort of suicide mission or a difficult one, then they put their names in on such port shards. They were put in a helmet, and the helmet was shaken, and whichever one fell out, and the guy with his name on that had to perform that action or had to go into this on this mission. So that's what it meant. So, and that's interesting because that can be really associated with the manner in which the lots are cast in a natal chart. So, and that's what he said: the lot represents some province or topic in human life, which is another meaning of the word kleros, and represents this topic in a manner similar to a topical place, that is a house, which we now call a house in natal chart. So interesting. Now I looked at Wikipedia, and that site told me that a province is almost always an administrative division within a country or a state. The term derives from an ancient Roman provincia, that word, which was the major territorial and administrative unit of the Roman Empire territorial possessions outside Italy. And that was sort of a hint to me as well, because it's interesting, as it suggests that this allotted portion, astrologically, is actually outside the homeland, so to speak. And to me this suggests that it is outside the natal chart as such. And that can only mean that it refers to the realm outside the natal chart, which is the world at large, represented by the fortune places and all the other things having to do with the third level, which I will be addressing. So I find that very interesting. So again, the allotted portion is located outside of the natal chart in my conception, and I believe that was also Schmidt's conception. And then the world at large, represented by the fortune places, that's where these principles sort of land. So they are appointed, they are allocated to specific regions in the world at large. So represented, of course, by something in your natal chart, but then refer to the fortune places, etc. So that's a very interesting conceptual background of what it means to have to work with the lots, and especially the Hermetic lots. And another thing that's very important is that Schmidt said that the responsibility for this topic is allotted to the planetary lord of the image in which the lot is found. This is not an elective office, as certain other offices are in a given nativity. And this is very important, because this is the big difference, let's say, between a natal chart where planets are sort of representing certain places, certain images, etc. And it seems to be that that is sort of part and parcel of the fact that a planet is the domicile master of a certain image, etc. This big difference is that you could say that here is no free choice. This is simply pointing to a planet that needs to address the issue indicated by the specific lot that you're investigating, or the specific fortune place where this lot resides in the third level of this astrological model. So that's very important also, because there's sort of, well, you could say that this is the not free will level of the astrology, simply because when things in the world happen, they are happening because there are certain conditions that simply work in another way than your intentions. And that's a very interesting definition of what happens on this third level, this lowest level. Things happen there unbeknownst to us and without our intention, and yet they do happen there. So interestingly enough, this astrology really makes place for this sort of conceptualization of what's going on in the world around us and how it can manifest in your own life. So that makes this a very interesting subject to study, in my opinion. Now, let's have a quick look at the differentiation of solar light. The image that I will be showing is very popular, so I think you will know it. So let me talk about that for a little while. So here is the image. The prism that you see here is the one that's often used to differentiate the seven colors that become visible when you put a solar light through that prism. And that prism in our natal chart is not our natal chart, but it's at the first level, because everything that the sun represents, which is everything, sort of is filtered or comes down through the principles of the archetypal level, which is the places, the images, and the planets themselves. And then you see them coming to life in the 6 planets besides Helios, the sun, which is the giver of life, of course. And then it lands into our natal chart, so you can use the natal chart to see where the specific principles come to rest in your natal chart, and then you can simply do a natal chart reading. And that's all because this is the first level down. You go from principles to the natal chart, and that's where these planets reside. Now we can use the same image to understand something about the differentiation of fortune and the daimon, both these planets. So let's have a look at that. We can have sort of the same imagery for what's happening with the Hermetic lots. And that has to do with the way Schmidt talked about this, because the Greek word for a lot is kleros, as we've seen in a previous slide. And in an astrological context, this word refers to something cast out. Again, think of the shards and the potteries out from some place in the chart, and that normally is the ascendant. So you could say that the lot of daimon as seen here and the lot of fortune are sort of cast out from the ascendant, and that has to do with something very interesting. That has to do with the imagery, because as you can perhaps note from a previous presentation that I did on the Hermetic lots, which can be found at my YouTube channel, the formula that are given here refers to some sort of trick that you can use, because you take the last planet in this formula and you slide it to the ascendant, and the second planet in the formula slides over the same distance. So when the first one, for instance, for the daimon, when the moon reaches the ascendant, then where the sun ends up, there's a lot of diamond to be found. When you take a lot of eros, you put the lot of spirit on the ascendant, and the distance between the lot of spirit and Venus is then the distance that needs to be traveled by Venus to arrive at the place where Eros can be found. So yes, they are cast out from the ascendant. So that's interesting, because we have some very interesting principles that can be understood by this, which is the essence of a lot of this material that I will be presenting in this new tier. And as you can see, this lands in your fortune chart, which is a different one as compared to your natal chart, but they are closely connected with each other, and we will be addressing a lot of that. And that's the reason why certain events in our life can be understood to be can be referred to as trials by fire, and other ones can be perhaps seen as initiations. So that's the juice of it, I think. Another thing that's very interesting to address is what I call the Hermetic Circles of principles of the planets and the lots. And hermeneutic is a theory and methodology of interpretation, so something that explains, interprets, illustrates, or elucidates some principles. So, and that's very important to do with these 7 hermetic lots, because they can be quite mystifying in some sense. So let's have a look at that. And here it is. I've also presented this in my videos on the hermetic lots, so you can find it there as well, but I've introduced it here as well because it's such an important manner to try to understand and get to grips with these 3 levels of how principles are at work in our astrology. So when you look at number 1, which is Helios, the sun in nature, which is the principle of what eventually the lot of diamond also represents, well, that's the principle of dawn, spring. Nature awakens and comes to life. Whenever you have a sunrise in the morning, what happens is that nature comes to life. The birds start singing and everything opens up, and you come out of your bed and we start doing things, right? That's how we are awakened by the sunlight, and that principle is very recognizable by everybody. It's, let's say, in astrology, this is the philosophical component of what we could say is the Hermetic Circle having to do with the sun. Now, if you look at the second one, which is simply Helios, the sun in your natal chart, then you can say that that is something that awakens you from the inside, brings you as a person to life, what inspires you to act or do something. And you could say that this is the inner component of the solar principle. And you look at, when you look at the third one, which is the lot of daimon, so the lot of spirit, that is what awakens you in the outside world. That brings you to life. It stimulates you to take action. So that is the outer external component. So when you look at the black circle and the red numbers, they illustrate the conceptual cycle of principles from the highest to the lowest manifestation. So that is from 1, 2 to 3. That is the downward path. There's another one. You could also look at it the other way around. You could start with, of course, the lot of daimon, because that is something that motivates you from the outside, something that was of much interest to you when you were young, or perhaps even up until today when you are a grown-up person. And then you move to Helios, the sun, and then you can move to the sun itself. So the gray circle and the white numbers show the reverse order. We get motivated by things in the outer world, which then awaken us on the inside, as it were, and then might lead to a realization of the universal principle of awakening, which is the fountain of life, Helios, the sun. So that is the upward path. And I will be using this for all the other hermetic lots as a principle to try to understand and get to grips with what this specific hermetic lot simply indicates and signifies. Now, another very interesting take on all this material is the reference, or the source of where these hermetic lots came from, which was the paragon, or the panaretos, the all virtuous. Which is the translation of pan aretos. Pan is everything, all, and aretos is virtue. So do we want to talk about virtues? Let's have a look. Now, as you perhaps know, there are 7 virtues, and of course this comes from a lot of sources, and it was a pretty old material, and they were all associated with the 7 planets. So I'm not quite sure if this is the most correct one, because there are several attributes of the virtues to the several 7 planets. So yeah, I took these, but I might change them when I got further in this study with you. So Saturn is prudence and wisdom, the wisdom of knowing when to take action, of course. Jupiter is justice, Mars is resolve and courage. The Sun is temperance, I think, because it has to do with being in power, and people in power need to be temperate in their actions. Venus is, of course, about love. Mercury is about trust and faith, and the Moon is about hope. But there are also the 7 vices. And Saturn is associated with envy and jealousy and also foolishness. Jupiter with injustice, sloth. Mars with anger, wrath and cowardice. Sun with pride, conceit, hubris. Venus, unchastity, lust. Mercury with disbelief and doubt and also greed. Interesting. And the Moon with despair. So I think I will be addressing these issues because they are so interesting with regards to the 7 Hermetic lots, and also of course with the idea that there are things in life that test your virtues, and things that might stimulate vice in a sort, and they often have to do with situations that we are thrown in our lives and that we need to address. So virtues and vice is an interesting topic, and probably pretty strongly related to all this material. So interesting to investigate. So come join this tier and investigate it with me. So yeah, this is sort of take an inventory of what will be addressed in this new tier, and of course it's all directed at what we could call the secret doctrine of sorts, the ritualistic dimension, associations with magic and alchemy, etc. So that is what this tier is addressing. And of course, you know that there are many, many very pretty and interesting images delivered to us through all sorts of magical and ritualistic and alchemical books on this topic and subject, and they are all concentrating on actually the same thing. So the one on the right is very interesting. Centrum Mundi Concatenatum, and Concatenatum is to connect or link in a series of our chain, which I just did with the 3-tier idea of astrology, 3 levels of horoscopy able to be delineated by us, and we will be concentrating, of course, on the latter one, the path downward, the one ending up in the world, and the world as a starting point for things in your personal life, because that's what we're addressing in this tier. So yeah, thank you for listening, and have a look at what I will be offering. Please come join me on my Patreon to investigate these concepts and this secret doctrine, and find out how they shed light on your personal chart and the chart of your clients, of course. And I hope to see you there. So perhaps we'll meet there. And please join me for this interesting study, because it's really, really going deep into all sorts of material that is not easily addressed in all sorts of other sources. So yeah, join me.